Hoo boy, the newest release from Josef is here. The man became somewhat of a rock star in the gaming sphere. A filmmaker turned game developer who used his expertise to create first and foremost engaging experiences. Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons was an indie darling. A Way Out was quite janky and unpolished, but it experimented very successfully with how to approach a co-op game. It Takes Two, then, was his and Studio Hazelight's masterpiece. Not as serious as the previous two games, instead a light-hearted comedy journey with a relatable subject matter. And way more defined and better executed mechanics. The asymmetrical cooperative play now fully embraced, with whole levels instead of just set pieces, and completely different sets of mechanics for each player, emphasizing synergy instead of just playing alongside each other. And Split Fiction continues where It Takes Two left off. It's broadly the same concept, just with new levels and a new narrative. Instead of an estranged married couple, you are now a pair of writers, and instead of going on a magical journey of self-discovery to fix your marriage, you are now going on a magical journey of self-discovery to escape an experiment gone wrong. And you're gonna explore widely different worlds and environments by diving into all kinds of different stories, instead of exploring the area around a house. And also widely different worlds and environments contextualized through who cares, it was fun and didn't actually matter. When it comes to the basic mechanics, Split Fiction is very similar to the previous game. It's once again an action platformer. You can double jump and dash, you can wall run, and you have a situationally available hookshot. Every level also unlocks at some point special abilities for each of the characters, with different functionality, leading to different gameplay at times. Only one player is able to swim and dive in the Ice King chapter, while the other gets cool environment manipulation powers. And only one player gets to play around with gravity in the Cyberpunk chapter, so they get to view the city from all kinds of different angles. There are again a lot of fun mechanics and abilities in the game, sometimes one-offs or just for a set piece, and sometimes abilities you use throughout the whole chapter. There's the standard of one player having to steer a vehicle while the other takes over as gunner for a chase or something like that. Or one player has to control something in the environment while the other has to navigate through it. But a lot of times, each player has to take a different path and remove obstacles from the other player's path, so they can slowly make progress. Or they need to use their special abilities to help the other player, like when in the Cyberpunk chapter the character with the whip has to throw metal poles at a wall to build a makeshift bridge for the other, very similar to a puzzle in It Takes Two. Or in the Fairy Tale chapter, where the character that can shapeshift into an otter has to dive underwater and drag a plant the other player is hanging onto past obstacles. And while there is a lot of variety in the set pieces and mechanics, and while there is certainly some challenge to especially the combat and action scenes, it all feels a bit dumbed down from the previous game. It felt a bit more mindless, like I just did the thing without really paying attention to what happened on screen, without aiming, without paying attention to the enemies. You snap to the next platform during platforming. It never becomes completely trivial, the characters can lose health and it takes quite a bit of time to refill. But you can get hit quite often before you die, and outside of boss fights and certain set pieces, a defeated character reappears immediately, and even during boss fights, you only have to mash a button for a few seconds to respawn. Maybe I'm misremembering, but It Takes Two felt a lot more punishing. I believe I couldn't just take as many hits, and it took a bit longer to respawn, which meant the other player had to avoid getting killed for longer, because if both characters die, it's back to the checkpoint. I made a lot of mistakes during some boss fights, but I was fine. I didn't die as often as I expected. Though, on the other hand, the attacks felt more bullshitty. Wider hitboxes on the attacks, or more erratic attacks, obstacles spawning in a way where you can't really dodge everything, stuff like that. I liked the previous game's difficulty. It was never super hard, but you still had to play well. It still demanded a bit of dexterity, some good reflexes. This game here, well, it looks like it doesn't want you to lose. Also, the game feels unpolished in a lot of places. Sometimes the snap towards a platform just doesn't work, or the system just skips a platform that you try to hop on because there's a switch on it you need to hit. It's often not clear whether you can pull yourself up a ledge or not. Some objects don't have any collision at all. Sometimes the collision traps you in an infinite floating state without escape, forcing you to reload the checkpoint. Often the level design doesn't make it clear where you should go and where you're just gonna die, or it tricks you either through malice or incompetence into making a wrong move. Many interesting routes take you to nothing. Missable side content is placed next to points of no return, giving you no chance to correct your mistake and having to load the game to access the side stories. During chase segments and the like, when you die, you often respawn right in front of an obstacle, causing you to die again immediately. And while we're at it, the story is shit as well. Now earlier I said the story wasn't that important in the previous game, and that's right. The setup is explained in 2 sentences and everything else is just fluff. It wasn't great or deep or all too meaningful. You could even argue the conclusion sends the wrong message. But since it was a very simple, relatable story that purposefully didn't take itself too seriously, the more artificial elements didn't matter all too much. But in Split Fiction, there's this sci-fi thriller going on. It's not only an experiment gone wrong, not only 2 writers trying to escape a simulated world born from their ideas, there's also this evil corporation that tries to extract the writer's creativity through a super virtual reality machine. And a board of evil investors plotting evil consequences through an evil conference call. The 2 writers just assume things out of the blue and it's just right. Like when they clear the first side mission and talk about how they just saved their idea from being stolen by the evil corporation without any indication for that. Later they are proven right, but the game treats them as correct the whole time. The whole setup is that unpublished writers are invited to test out this new way of storytelling, where people dive straight into a story through some virtual reality technology. Though the way this is presented, I feel this should have been explained as a tool for writers to explore their own worlds, to have better world building and stuff, and not as a new medium for customers to experience these stories, because at that point, it's just another type of video game. I will come back to this. Now, one of the 2 protagonists doesn't like how this works and wants to back out, but the evil CEO dude suddenly gets touchy and also very insistent that she has to take part. So what? Haven't they been briefed on what they're supposed to do here? Why isn't there some sort of explanation before they're supposed to step into the weird machine? Well, the CEO tries to push the woman into her circle position thingy, but things go wrong and she stumbles into another woman's water bubble, and now they are trapped in a glitched virtual reality, where both their ideas mix together and form this virtual world. I guess you can't just pull them out, but that's easy enough to explain, like just say that their brains would get fried if you forcibly take them out of the bubble. But now they're just going off on their own inside the simulation. They don't want to cooperate with the CEO, even though they don't know that he's evil. Until they just know. Until they hear what he says to his investors while in his office. Don't know how they manage to do that. Especially since the game never shows us that. Like, for example, by having us actually listen to his words while we're playing through the levels. The 2 writers also never give any indication that they can hear him. They never talk about it or anything. I mean, prior to the reveal that they know everything. To be fair, he did say something about extracting ideas when they got trapped in a machine, but come on, at that point, that could mean anything. It's a future bullshit sci-fi machine. Maybe extracting means pulling it out of their subconscious and giving it form in the simulation. But no, even though they don't understand their situation and must be under quite some stress, they caught on immediately. And to their luck, the guys monitoring them didn't notice they overheard the conversation. It's also only ever when they are on the PS2 startup screen that they actually talk with the CEO, even though they can hear him and even though he can see and hear them the whole time. I don't know, it kinda feels like the plot point has just been tacked on, or maybe the story has always been weak and nonsensical. On the same note, since everyone can hear the CEO talking about his evil plans, why aren't the other participants in the experiment reacting? They are not trapped in the simulation. But I guess they're only here as background decoration. The funny thing is, the game lampshades the fact that the characters and the story beats inside the chapters aren't all that great, because the 2 writers are inexperienced and maybe even bad at their chosen profession. But the actual story of the game is as badly written. Maybe the reveal at the end will be that the whole plot is just another hack writer stories inside the simulation. But yeah. The story is bland and full of artificial drama and conflict. The characters are either flat and one note, or in the case of our 2 protagonists, superficially complicated.
We looked you up, and if it's financial assistance you require, I might be able to help you.
One of them is the angsty one, keeping others always an arm's length away from her and trying to deal with her problems on her own, while the other one is simultaneously extrovert and bubbly and childishly optimistic, but also submissive and self-conscious. And she thinks that everything an author writes has to stem from an inner conflict. You can only enjoy writing about violence, like an action or fight scene, if you're deeply troubled. And every character has to be based on a person from the writer's environment. But as shallow and at times bad as the writing is, the dialogues themselves aren't as cringe-worthy as I feared when I first saw the reveal trailer. Now, well, that statement is so utterly subjective that it's pretty much useless. Maybe you find them insufferably annoying, maybe you really like them. There are a lot of forced, clever and humorous remarks, they do quip a lot and make bad puns, so they might get on your nerves rather quickly, or you fully enjoy the silliness. I didn't hate their dialogue. Up until now there was maybe one line that made me go, oof. But the rest was fine, not great. I don't think the dialogue is completely atrocious, but it's also not very good. It's just there and I managed to mostly not get bothered by it. Or maybe it's the characters themselves that aren't that good. Overall, I wouldn't call them amazingly written characters. They're as flat as all the other ones, just not as one note. More like 3 or 4 note. I really don't care about them, and it's a shame because the story takes itself so much more seriously this time and wants me to care about them. The story really needs work. Make a better villain, or drop the thriller angle and make it just about the lab accident and don't have a villain. Have the CEO actually try to help them without an ulterior motive, so that we can just focus on the protagonist's journey without any extra bullshit. I mean, the whole plot falls apart right at the start and the story doesn't make an attempt to create any mystery, so just drop it. I don't need a cabal of evil men exploiting the poor creatives made by EA. It's just the most uninteresting thing they could have done. But there's another issue with the setting, or setup or whatever, that I would have changed. So the whole game is about this machine that transports you into the writer's imagination or something. You get to explore the stories they've come up with. In the story, this is supposed to be this new form of story consumption, and I already mentioned that this is closer to a video game than reading a book. You just play the stories in your full-body virtual reality device. So why wasn't that the hook? Why does it have to be writers and not game designers? Then at least all the gaming references wouldn't be so out of place.
Let's traverse the sands of time.
You mostly play action segments. How fun could it actually be to read about this cyber ninja who first shoots down spaceships, then escapes on top of flying vehicles on a skyway, then fights a bunch of dudes, then fights a police robot, then escapes on a bike and shoots more dudes, then fights another police robot? It would be a shit book. But as a game, it's fucking fun. That's what we are playing right now, and it is fucking fun. So yeah, make this about game development. A new tool for game designers to bring their creations to life. Without the boring coding work, but oh no, it all went wrong and now we're trapped in the game. It wouldn't change anything about the game's progression, about the things that are or aren't possible. It only would make our protagonists look a bit less inept. They don't know how to write anything aside from set pieces, so making them game developers, focusing on engaging gameplay with story as a second concern, would actually help. They can still have their issues we get to explore, but they're not completely out of place in this setting. The only thing you'd lose is the catchy title. Split fiction doesn't really mean a lot if it's not about books, right? And split screen just doesn't sound as good, does it? But we would still get to explore all those wacky places, because despite that the whole setup is that we alternate between the imaginations of those two authors, one exclusively writing fantasy while the other only sci-fi, as if that is a thing, we find ourselves in all kinds of environments. The game doesn't just stick to high fantasy fairy tales and future high-tech sci-fi. That's just the main levels that each take quite a while to beat. But inside, you'll find these little side stories, contextualized as old, unfinished ideas of the two writers. And these can be pretty much anything. Desert sand shark riding, farm life adventures concluded with some floppy wieners, rock climbing giants, a deadly game show, the last moments of a dying star. So there's a lot of variety when it comes to the levels and settings. But this is already true for the main levels. Even inside the main setting there are many visually and mechanically different areas. Explore the streets of a cyberpunk city, a daring escape over flying cars on a literal highway. Climb high-rise buildings, have a motorcycle chase. The magical fairy tale forest has the dark and creepy undergrowth, the snowscape with beautifully visually contrasting red maples, and the castle of the Ice King. The music accompanying these levels is quite nice, but mostly drowned out. The music never really ramps up, it's just there. Not bad, but nothing special. And even when a stronger piece is played, it's just so quiet, always behind the action. There's never really any emphasis on the music, which isn't a huge problem. But this even extends to the dancing minigame, the one moment where the music really should step into the foreground. But yeah, it seems the music really wasn't the focus with this game, which is totally fine because it's really more about the environment and level design. There's once again some really good art design going on and some amazing creativity on display when it comes to the environment and the self-contained puzzles and challenges. So nothing has changed there. That's what you'd expect from a sequel to It Takes Two. So it's a shame that there seems to be less in this world. There are small interactions here and there, but there are so many empty, at least mechanically empty places inside these beautiful levels. The previous game had many minigames or just little interactive moments for the two players to goof around. Well, the interactive moments are back, a few of them, but this game is so much less than the previous one. Great fun to play through the set pieces and challenges, but I don't know, it lacks heart compared to It Takes Two. That one is still Hazelight's best game in my opinion. Is this game worth playing? Absolutely. It's still a blast, but it's more than just one step back from the previous game. The one-off ideas are all great and I appreciate this, let's call it machine gun approach to set pieces, but the game didn't go far enough with it. I would have loved to see some genre mixing, have swords and magic in the space future robot story, have a dragon appear in the cyberpunk story, have space marines lay waste to the magical elven forest, stuff like that. Maybe this is going to happen later, that would be awesome. For now it's just a fun ride with an irritating story. Definitely a good time, but I'm worried for their next game and the future of the studio. What I want from a sequel is more polish, better realized ideas. Not more of the same but slightly worse, but still fun enough to not really complain about. It's a good game, it could have been more. That's it from Rady. I wish you the greatest of days and I hope to see you again on the next game.